Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. I'm coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I wish to acknowledge this because I learn and work on Métis ancestral lands, or as we know it here in Edmonton, Treaty 6, the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakuta soul. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. This is where we will strive to honor and transform our relationships with each other. If this is your first time listening to Tales of the LGBTQ+, welcome. We are a visual and audio podcaster and listen to your stories, the story of our rainbow community. We are brilliant, amazing, and fascinating people, so do please take the time to listen to previous episodes. You may hear your story in some of those words. Or, if you have not heard your story, please contact me at taleslgbtq+@gmail.com or one of our many other social platforms. We would love to have you come onto this show. If you are a returnee, then heck yes, we are doing something right. In fact, I know we're doing something right. Please subscribe on YouTube, or if you're on an audio platform such as Apple Podcasts, please leave a starred review, some written words. This gets noticed by a host such as Apple. They then promote our stories to the rest of the world. And as we know, our LGBTQ+ stories need to be heard by everyone. Today's guest is Brad Shreve, and I'm excited to have him on. I got to meet him as we are part of podcast groups, and I enjoyed how much effort he put into helping other people with their podcast, with ideas, suggestions, etc. Later on, when I found out that he is part of our LGBTQ+ community, even better. I am a fan of mystery novels. These stories that he's written, in fact, 2 of them, part of a Mitch O'Reilly mystery series, A Body in the Bathhouse, A Body on the Hill. And I understand he has a 3rd one coming hopefully sooner than later. We're going to talk about the genesis of this and why he wanted to put this character into the world. He's also a podcast host, Queer Writers of Crime, where he is able to introduce everyone to LGBTQ+ mystery and suspense writers. It's a great listen as well, and I am going to get his ear a little bit in how he has become successful within this genre. So Brad himself, he comes to us from the corporate world. In fact, in his own words, he says, having lost himself in the corporate world, Brad Shreve discovered the big office and prestigious title, but were not great for living a life he found fulfilling. As a grown-up, he pondered what he wanted to do when he became a bigger grown-up. I'm going through that myself at this time. And the answer was obvious. His fingertips have been on the keyboard ever since. In 2019, he published A Body in the Bathhouse, his first novel in the before-mentioned Mitch O'Reilly mystery series. And he has a 2nd novel in that series, A Body on the Hill. He is the host of Queer Writers of Crime, a weekly podcast featuring interviews with LGBTQ+ authors of mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. Without further ado, let's welcome Brad Shreve to Tales of the LGBTQ+. Welcome, Brad. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, very well, Douglas. Thank you for having me on the podcast because it forced me to shave today. I do want to thank you for having this show podcasts are growing like crazy, and I'm happy to see so many more LGBTQ podcasts coming out. It's growing incredibly fast. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. It's been one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I was never a listener of podcasts fully before this. And I started this because after 15 months within this pandemic life that we've all been living, I missed hearing people's story, able to be face to face. So by doing it through a podcast like this, I'm able to listen and be selfish by soaking up the great knowledge that that our community has to share. So it's my honor to be able to have a platform like this to share with everyone. And let's get people knowing more about you if they have not heard of you to this point, because your voice is an excellent one to share with everybody. Brad, I know that I could start an interview like this saying, Brad Shreve, this is your life. And we could start at the beginning and go year after year. But I'm going to mix it up a little bit here today. Considering that you are a writer of mystery novels, what is your favorite murder weapon?
Well, that's kind of hard to say, considering the first book, it was a knife that was used as the murder weapon. And the third book, which I'm still writing, it's a knife again. So I'm not all that creative. I guess I'll say knives. They're quiet is why I use them.
You always have to go with the quiet ones. And, you know, and when you're having a murder that takes place in the bathhouse, there's only so many choices that you can have, really, to hide a weapon, unless they are very circus performer-like and have abilities that are more supernatural than anything else.
I'm sure there are guys at the bathhouses that can do all kinds of supernatural abilities, but we won't go there.
Well, and you know, in making this part fun and lighthearted, a lot of people, a lot of writers immerse themselves into the settings of their novels, and you know, really get to understand the scenery for it. Why was your first novel, at least the murder part, based with a bathhouse?
I don't know. I honestly can't remember. I get that asked a lot. What I'm finding is I talk to writers and sometimes they're like, I just can't think of a title for my book. And I'm kind of the opposite. A title will hit me and then I'll write around that. So somehow A Body in the Bathhouse, it clicked. I really liked it. I liked the concept, the idea. A Body on a Hill, or The Hill. I came up with that name first as well and said, okay, what story fits that? And there we go.
Yeah, so you're a writer then that has the title first, and then you go in the creation of the, correct with that?
That is correct. I have a list of, I don't know how many A body blank that I've written up on paper or actually have on the computer for upcoming story ideas.
It's fantastic. You know, when I was reading your first book there, I was thinking to myself, as a person that when I write, I have to immerse myself in settings. And, you know, Brad, you are a tame, honest, likable person, but I sure would hate to come across you in a bathhouse if you were thinking of where the perfect murder would take place within that time, as we were all wearing towels at that moment. So that was my worry, but it's all good now. Hey, we're talking about initially here Brad's books. Once again, A Body in a Bathhouse, as well as the second book, A Body on the Hill, as I wrote this down wrong. And it's all part of the Mitch O'Reilly mystery series. Is having a main character that captures people's attention and their love. What is it about Mitch O'Reilly that has caused you to want to write about him and to continue to write his story?
I like a lot about Mitch. He is a wisecracking, smart ass sometimes, quite a bit. And what I like about that is he gets to say things that I can't. If he just speaks his mind for the most part. But I also really like him. He's been through some rough times. He grew up pretty well. He got into college and partied a little too heavy at the bathhouses and dropped out of college. And from that point on, it's been a real struggle for him. So it's kind of made him kind of a negative outview on life. I can't think of the right word. Yet at the same time, he roots for the underdog. In both books, there are individuals. Well, the first book, there's the guy that sleeps right in front of his door every night, a homeless man, and he takes him food, breakfast occasionally, or something for lunch. And so I like that he's not as jaded as some PIs, but he still has his struggles.
So when you create a character such as this one, how much do you bring from your own real life, or do you base this on people who are around you in real life?
As a writer, sometimes you don't know exactly where a character or an idea comes from. It could be a mix of a woman that you saw at Starbucks, my brother, somebody I used to work with, put together. So it's hard to pinpoint how he came about. Other than to say, I don't know. That's really my answer. Was there more to the question?
Well, it's always interesting to me when, especially when it's about a series of books, because beginning that I imagine that you are still trying to discover and identify, trying to learn about, and it's within your reading and the words that go upon the page where you're then able to fully understand why this character has come about. And from just listening to your answer here, I think that answer is still to come. And I think what makes your future books exciting is because the character is going to discover as you discover them. And I think that's quite exciting, that it's a character that's going to be moldable, but you're going to be able to go on that journey with them.
That is one of the great things. I know exactly where my readers want Mitch to go. And if you're one of my readers and you know what you want to happen to Mitch, I'm not guaranteeing anything. I don't guarantee happily ever afters. Not to say that there won't be a happy ever after. It's all part of the mystery. I really don't at this. I have ideas of what direction I want him to go. I don't think that will happen in the end whenever I decide to end the series. But it's as I go along, the different ideas come to me and I'm like, okay, I can use this, or I can use this. And here's where I want him to go in his journey.
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, it's an exciting time sharing stories and things that go with that. Is that the same when it comes to the murder suspense novels as well? Do you find that there is an opening for this type of book within our community and the market itself?
It's actually growing tremendously. Joseph Hansen wrote a book called Fade Out in 1970. And if anybody's interested in catching up on the queer crime genre, I would highly recommend this book. It wasn't the first gay private detective, but it was the first one that had a major impact. I think he wrote 12 to 15 books with David Brandstetter as his protagonist. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But it was growing at that point, and we're starting to see some growth at the end of the 70s into the early 80s. And then publishers stopped publishing crime novels as a rule. Some people continued. Most were cut off. And for multiple reasons. Some They didn't find it necessarily as profitable as they wanted it to be. And the second was the AIDS crisis. It became a little more taboo to have a gay character when that was going on. And sadly, we lost a lot of great writers during that time period as well. Since then, we've seen it growing more. Major publishers are starting to take on queer authors now, and self-publishing has gotten so huge that there are so many books that are available. Now, there's good things and bad things. The beauty of self-publishing is everyone can write a book. The bad thing is everybody can write a book. But there is actually an LGBTQ plus mystery thriller category on Amazon, which really surprises people. But when I started the show, people were like, well, are there really that many? And I can tell you we're reaching 100 episodes and I'm not even close to scratching the surface.
That's fantastic. To the people who will be watching us live on YouTube, I've just put the address where you can find Brad's mystery novels. For the people who will be listening to us later on through our audio platform, simply go to www.amazon.com/Brad-Shreve, which is SHREVE /E. And of course, there's going to be a longer portion to that. But if you get that part into your search engine, you're going to be able to find the rest there as well. To go with that in many ways, because people can self-publish and there's the good and there's the bad of it, to you, what makes a great mystery novel?
What makes a great mystery novel is when all the clues are there in plain sight and the reader doesn't get it. Also, you have to be fair and give them the information. Mystery readers are funny. They want to solve the crime before the sleuth does. They really try. But if they do figure it out, they're really angry, and you'll get a bad review that they were able to figure it out before the detective. So it's a tough balancing act. And any mystery author that is able to do that gets my praise, because it's not easy to do. It requires a lot of thought.
Yeah. And what are some writers, whether they are part of our rainbow community or not, who are some of those writers that do exactly that for you as a reader?
Well, let's start with the novels that I read that really made me a mystery fan. All these individuals, I don't think, well, none of them identify as queer, but it actually started with the Encyclopedia Brown series when I was a kid. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yes.
I look back on one recently and I'm like, how come those were hard to figure out when I was a kid? Because they sure are easy now. But other authors that inspired me to get more involved with mystery, Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Spencer series. People may remember Spencer for Hire back in the 70s. It's based on the book. They took liberties. Lawrence Block has probably had the biggest influence on me. For some reason, he's not a well-known name. He has won many awards. He has two series that he writes. One is the Bernie the Burglar series, which is a burglar, and anytime he keeps getting himself into a situation where he looks like a murder suspect, such as robbing somebody and there's a body. That series is funny and sometimes madcap. Yet he has the Matthew Scudder series, in which we have an ex-cop, alcoholic, dark and brooding sleuth. And the fact that he does both so beautifully, I really admire him. He is probably the author I look to the most, because I do like a tense mystery, but I love some humor in there as well. So I've learned a lot from him. As far as LGBTQ authors go, wow. It puts me on the spot being a host of the show, and many of these people have become my friends, but I'm going to give you some names anyway. Michael Nava is a must-read. He started his series in the early 80s, and he's still writing them today. He stopped for years, and he's writing them now again. It's still in the 80s during the AIDS crisis. He is probably one of the most well-known and respected LGBTQ authors out there, if not the most. His work is even taught in colleges as part of their curriculum. Another one would be another one of the greats, which is Richard Stevenson, who he wrote the Donald Strachey series, and he's probably my favorite series to read. It started in 1981 with his first book, Death Trick. And he and his partner had a open relationship that wasn't necessarily spoken. They just did. And there were times where Donald would actually sleep with, or not sleep, I hate that term, have sex with some of the suspects just to get information out of them. But over time, that was the very first novel, and it was the only one that was written before everyone knew about AIDS. They kind of kept, we're hearing about this gay cancer was being batted around, but they weren't really sure what it was. All the novels since then have been during the AIDS crisis or later, and we've seen the couple, Donald and his partner, which his name is escaping me. His latest book, they're very settled and are very happy together as a couple. And that's an interesting series to follow, to see that dynamic change with time. And he's really good about throwing in some humor in addition to a really good mystery.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's also one of the few queer authors that have had his books made into movies. 4 of them were. I will tell you, Richard will tell you, don't watch them. Please read the book. They starred Chad Allen, and he absolutely loved Chad Allen in the role. Unfortunately, the screenwriters didn't give Chad much to do with. And that's true of a lot of gay films, because they just don't have a very big budget. That's changing too, fortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question that's kind of like the chicken or the egg, but was it your mystery novels that came out first, or was it your podcast?
Mystery novels.
What led you then to start the podcast, the Queer Writers of Crime?
Well, I didn't know there was such thing as a queer crime genre at all. I thought, like a lot of people think, the only thing that's out there is romance and erotica or literary works. And literary works are either coming out or dealing with AIDS. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but those are the three things, only 3 things you ever saw. And there's actually many, many more types of books that are out there. And I just happened to stumble on a gay mystery novel. It was written by someone who's become a friend, Mark McNeese. And it was Murder at Pride Lodge. And I found this book and I read it, and I'm like, the PI is gay, or the detective is gay. This is really awesome. I kind of thought it was a fluke until suddenly I started to get to know more and more writers. Some that have helped me. Marshall Thornton is one. And there's many, many others. And after I published my first novel, I thought, if I didn't know this genre existed, other people, I'm sure, don't know either. Probably thousands. Probably millions, although I don't expect my podcast to reach to millions. I'm going to do what I can. And that was really when I made the decision a podcast is necessary. Like you, I was not big into podcasting How a podcast idea hit me, I'm not really certain, but I knew I wanted to get the word out there, and the podcast seemed the best way to do it, to say we're here. Because I would say romance writers are really good at making connections. They work together on Facebook. They promote each other. They promote each other through newsletters. They have conferences. And a lot of that is because romance is just very popular across all demographics. Mystery writers haven't been as good at that. We are sometimes screaming, we're here, though that is getting better. And so that's why I decided I need a podcast. And it was 2019 in August that I came up with the idea. And I talked to my husband, and he kind of thought it was a little bit crazy and said, take it slowly. So I said, okay, I'll give it 9 months. My second book will be out by then. And it will give me that whole time period to do a little research on podcasting and see if it's something in what I want to do. Instead of waiting 9 months, I got the idea in August, and my first episode aired in October.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar to me.
I think once you get the bug and you find out how fantastic podcasts are, it's hard to hold back.
Yeah, I just want to mention to ours, Queer Writers of Crime can be found at a website where you can find all the previous episodes. There's no, what would be the correct word? There's no hinting what the website is. It's simply www.queerwritersofcrime.com. So you've made it quite easy for everyone to find it. Brad, I haven't asked you this question yet in our personal discussions because I wanted to wait until right now. The title of the podcast itself wasn't first Queer Writers of Crime. It was something different.
No, it actually started originally as Gay Mystery Authors. And people were asking me, what does that mean? Does it mean the authors are gay, or it's authors that are writing gay novels? Mm. And I was asked that more than once, and I thought, maybe I'm confusing people. So I changed the name to Gay Mystery Podcast. I don't know why I thought that would be any different. It's just as vague as Gay Mystery Authors, but that's what I changed it to. And I thought, okay, problem solved. Well, it wasn't. People assumed that was gay men only, since gay has pretty much become synonymous with men only as a rule. And it also implied that it was only murder or mysteries that I interviewed. And our show really is about mystery, suspense, and thriller novels. And I've always tried to make it diverse. And so I started rethinking. Actually, I got the idea of maybe I should only have LGBTQ folk on the show, because in the past I've had authors who didn't identify as queer, actually identify as straight, but write gay genres. And they do it very well. I'm not saying that they can't do it. Some do extremely well, some not so well. But I felt like I really needed to promote and give more attention to LGBTQ folk out there. Need to help get them out there. So I decided that I was going to change the format to that, and I announced it. I even had talked to some of the straight guests that were on before and said, I just want you to know, I'm not going to pull your show at all, but I am changing the format to this. And the ones I talked to were all very supportive of the idea. They said, we get it. We understand why you're doing it. So that's where I came up with the queer part. And I do want to go into that. Queer was a challenge as well. I wasn't sure whether to use LGBTQ, or because I knew queer had some negative connotations for a lot of people. And I did a lot of asking, I did polls, and there were, I'm going to say as a general rule, it was mostly older men that were offended that I would even use such a word as queer, because it was used to hurt them dramatically in the past. And But as a rule, queer is becoming more and more common. I think for a lot of reasons. I was very much against it at the beginning because I thought it was just a strange thing. But I quite honestly got tired of the alphabet. And I like that it's an umbrella term that everyone falls under, at least in my eyes. So after talking to enough people and looking at podcast names, there were some great podcasts such as yours that had LGBTQ. There were some great ones that had queer. It didn't seem to affect one or the other. Just because I thought queer and crime were better sounding together, I went with queer. And I rolled it out. I only had one person that complained. It was a person on Twitter. When I announced the name change, he said he's never going to listen to my show again, and he's going to no longer follow me on Twitter. Now, he is still following me on Twitter for some reason, but I have no idea whether he's listening to the show. But I did get a dozen emails that said, thank you for changing the format. And thank you for making it clear. Gay was a problem in the sense that I had to reach out to lesbians, bisexuals, trans folk to get them on the show as a rule. And those that had been guests on my show, I spoke with some trans individuals and some lesbians, and they said, yeah, we really appreciated you promoting us in that way and giving us a way to speak out. But it did seem kind of weird to be on a gay show. Mm-hmm. So that was when I firmly decided to change that. The reason to go from mystery to crime is, again, our tagline has always been featuring mystery, suspense, and thriller novels. But I would have people that would email me or talk to me and say, I have a thriller. Are you willing to have my book on your show? And I'm like, well, of course. And I got that more often than I expected. So again, that's why I changed mystery to crime. And that's how I came up with Queer Writers of Crime. So it was a long journey and probably a longer explanation than you were expecting, but that's where I am today. And yeah, I can't imagine changing the name again.
It's this weird but wonderful journey that we go on when it comes to our community with terms and where we'll be in the future. There's been many conversations in previous episodes where some of these terms I have not been aware of, or they're relatively new. And I can imagine the terms that we're going to be using 10 years from now may not have been created yet or have not been uttered from our lips. I'm glad that you mentioned both queer and older males. I've always hated the word queer. Always, always, always. And like you, I've noticed that this word has been used more and more. And a lot of my friends describe themselves as being queer. And it was used against me when I was growing up. And when it came to tales of the LGBTQ plus, part of why I put the Q in there is to help myself and to be able to overcome that word being used against me before by having to say that Q. I'm like, okay, that's who I am. It's a positive. I'm in a better spot. I'm able to move on from it. So we're all doing our own psychiatric work as we're doing our journey as we go along. And can be just a simple word, because it is just a word, but there's so much embedded within that word itself.
Yeah, there really is. And as I said, I didn't like the word at all for basically the same reasons you're giving. And the reason I became more and more comfortable with it, people that, I don't know, the different generations, X generation, millennials, I don't know which level, but let's say college age right now and high school, junior high, whatever, queer is the word that is used. And as I've seen it being used more and more as amongst older adults, I became more comfortable with it and found it a convenient word to use. And one of the defining factors of using queer in the podcast name is there is an editor who I highly respect. He's also an author. And I heard him on a podcast one time say that he did not identify as queer. He did not like the term queer. And I bounced the idea of queerize the crime off of him. And he said, well, I think that's a great idea. And I said, you were on this podcast a while back that you absolutely did not like queer. And he goes, was I really? And I said, yeah. He said, I've changed. And I think part of that changing was being in the publishing industry.
So you've talked to approximately 100 authors upon your podcast. What have you learned? Is there something that's similar with all of them? Or are they just coming to your podcast and with their works with divergent ideas? Is there anything that you can capture them together as saying that there's something that they all embody?
It's easy for me to first talk about the differences, and it's dramatically different. Authors as a role are probably more introverted than extroverted, but that's not always true. And it's not, I was surprised how many extroverts there are. And just the difference in backgrounds, the difference in coming out stories, that I really like. It's good that we're all different because it gives me more to talk about on my podcast. The similarities are, one, the thing that I brought up earlier is it's really hard to pinpoint where your ideas come from. Mm. All of them have a love for the genre. They may write under different genres. I know quite a few that write mysteries and romance. Sometimes the romance is under a pen name. And honestly, sometimes they're doing the romance ones to earn money while it allows them to write the books that they want to do. Because, as I said, mystery novels are definitely getting a lot more attention these days. We're still not there yet. Not there yet. Although I will say I recently interviewed a trans author. Authors, God bless them, they could not get into a publishing house to save their lives. What they usually heard from major publishing houses are, we like your book, but we already had a trans author this year, which is repulsive to me. And we're seeing that change. And I recently interviewed a trans author that was just recently published by a major publishing house. In fact, I'll give her name. It's Robin Geigel. And it's a great book. And Geigel is spelled G-I-G-L. And she's an attorney, has done a lot of work within the LGBTQ community, and her character in her novel is an attorney as well.
It's frustrating to hear that publishing houses today in 2021 would say that or believe that there's a quota, especially when it comes to excellent writing. It's shameful. We've got a long ways to go when it comes to all of this.
And it's still harder for gays and lesbians. Like I said, I think trans folks have the biggest struggle. Gays and lesbians, it's still tough to get in, though it is happening more and more. It's one of the reasons why there are many small-time LGBTQ publishers, as well as a lot of folks went the self-publishing route. They were forced into the self-publishing route at one point. Do you still have that dream guest that you have not been able to capture yet? Are you still waiting for that dream person to come onto your show? You know, I don't think so. Every author that has been on my show, I greatly admire. I will say the most famous author I've had was Christopher Rice, who's Anne Rice's son, and has had multiple best-selling novels. And he has an outstanding podcast. May I say its name?
Of course.
It's called Christopher and Eric, and it's Christopher Rice and his best friend for years, Eric. And it's an outstanding show. What they do, it's a true crime show, but unlike the others, they watch true crime episodes of like 2020 on TV. And then on the show, they will talk very seriously about the actual murder itself, but there's a lot of laughs in it because they talk about the horrible production values of the reenactments of the crimes themselves. And they're just a fun people to listen to. They do the true crime show every other week, and the other times it could be anything. And so Christopher is the biggest name that I believe I've had. When it comes strictly to novels, I would say Michael Nava's the biggest one I've had. But I have never been turned down at all. So there's no one I would be afraid to ask. And no one I asked has said no. Actually, no. There was one guy that I did have booked. I apologize. I did have him booked. And he did say, I don't want to be on when I changed the name to queer. But he wasn't that well known. Not that I don't think he deserves attention. I respect that of him. But I've reached, other than that, everybody wanted to be on the show is on it. Unless there's somebody I haven't thought of yet.
I have a similar thing to that as well, that when I first started, I tried to make sure that we were bringing diverse voices to the show. And so I asked a few people, and I have a laundry list of many people from Edmonton, Alberta, Alberta itself, Canada, the United States, where you're based. And I've had to stop. Yes. And there's not enough time for me to be doing podcast shows just because of the interest. That has been wonderful to see and to feel. And people want their stories, whether it's mystery, suspense, thrillers, crime, like the ones that you're platforming, or the personal stories like we're doing here today. Speaking of personal stories, I touched up, you were part of the corporate world, and that it wasn't the right thing for you anymore. Was the transition easy, or was this the most difficult thing ever?
Well, the intro is kind of the Reader's Digest version of what really happened. I worked in the hotel industry, but I got out of the hotels pretty quickly after a few years and mainly worked in corporate offices. After a good number of years, I wanted to leave the corporate world. So I left the company I was working for and actually went right back to another hotel company's office. And the reason I left, I was actually looking to leave. I was looking for opportunities to leave, and I ended up being forced out. And that's because of 9/11. When 9/11 hit, it destroyed the travel industry in general. There were massive layoffs in hotels, airlines, etc. And the company that I worked for it was a company that owned multiple chains. They were a franchise company, and my boss held on to me and fought for me to stay with the company as long as she could. I was part of the fourth wave of people that were let go. So I was kind of the lucky one because I did hang on a little bit longer, but I was forced out of it. But once I was forced out of it, I was like, what do I want to do? And I didn't want to go back to that. And so I started taking jobs that were not as lucrative, such as managing a coffee house, working at Trader Joe's, but I enjoyed more. I enjoyed much more. When it came to being a writer, well, I have bipolar disorder, and I was trying to think of what I wanted to do. And I always had this idea, like I said, of always being a writer. Well, not always, but there's a story behind that. But I've thought of being a writer for many, many years, and I have bipolar disorder, and I reached the point that I wasn't able to work. I was at a job, managed a coffee house, and one day I just stopped showing up. It was something I've dealt with my whole life, but it had reached the point that I couldn't even leave the house. I was agoraphobic. I would force myself with my husband into a supermarket, and usually within 2 minutes, I would say, meet me outside, and I would literally run out the door because it was so overwhelming to me. And so I was dealing with the mania and the depression, which makes it very hard to work a normal job. You know, if you're going to be depressed in bed for a few weeks, not many employers like to put up with that. And I read a book called Men Together, and it's a coffee table book with a full page picture of a male couple, and then there will be a story about that couple. And in one of those stories, it said that one of the individual runs his own business because he believes he's unemployable. And that was when I thought, you know, there probably is something I can do. And that's when writing, I thought, I've been thinking of this writer idea and have written notes my whole life. Maybe that's where I need to go. And that was really where I went. So, and I have no regrets about leaving the corporate world at all. And I have no desire to go back there.
I've mentioned on this podcast a couple of times before that within our household, my husband is bipolar, and it manifests itself in different ways. And you've been very open in sharing this to our listeners, because we don't talk about mental health or the different ways that we describe a disease, something like this. So it's great to have this put out there. You may or may not agree with what I say next here. It's difficult for my husband, but at many times I do see it as a gift that he shares with, just because of how he takes the time for himself and the self-care. And he's come into this self-love part that I'm excited about with this journey, because I've never met someone like him before. And him being bipolar is a large part of who he is. But at the same time, though, he's dealing with it the way that he can. And he's successful because of it, in spite of it. It's hard for me to say, because yes, it's a negative, but it's also part of who he is. And that's what makes him lovable at the same time. And so I guess this is my long way of coming around and asking, how does being bipolar affect your writing, or perhaps even your character, your Mitch O'Reilly character? What insights do you glean from that?
It does affect my writing. The third book I promised to be out this past spring, and it's not out yet, and it's not coming out anytime soon. It will be out this year. Because like a lot of people, last year was very difficult for me. And I expect, because I do have bipolar disorder, it was harder than most. I had depression much more often than I normally did. And when I was manic, it's very hard I have a million ideas, but it's hard to put them together into one. So it has affected me in writing in that sense. The positive is Mitch O'Reilly, my PI in the novels, he has PTSD. And I looked at, I debated whether to do a detective that's bipolar, and I may someday, because it's not done very well in movies and TV. But I decided to go with PTSD because I saw a lot of similarities, and the growth that he is going through to overcome his PTSD. I thought, you know, that's probably very similar to what I went through. I'm also an alcoholic, and it's probably very similar to what I went through after I went to AA and trying to adjust to society again. And so I talked to quite a few folks that have PTSD, usually veterans, and I gave them the layout of what I'd gone through, and they were like, yeah, that's what we experienced. So in that sense, Mitch doesn't have PTSD, but I understand where he's coming from, and I understand the difficult growth process that he's going through. One of the things with being an alcoholic is just, accepting that you're an alcoholic. And my life got worse as a result of getting sober, because for the first time I had to look at the mess that I had made and do something about it. So to say my life got worse, it was temporary, and it was so worth it. It's the same thing with bipolar disorder. I'm not going to say it was a gift. I am at a point of acceptance, but one of the best days of my life was when I was diagnosed. When they said, we're pretty certain you have bipolar disorder, because it gave it its name. I understand why I was as quirky as I am. And it made me realize I wasn't just plain crazy. Though I will say, when I talk to other bipolar folk, we openly say that we're crazy. It's one of those things that you can't call us crazy, but we'll call each other crazy. And I openly say it with my husband as well. So that's how it's affected both the negative. And the negative is that it affects the actual process of writing. The positive is it helps me with my stories.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, in doing research for our conversation today, I stumbled across what could be the title of the third book. You may have changed it by now, but the title of the third book that I saw was A Body, a Bear, and a Blade. Is that still the working title for the third book?
Almost. I did change one word. It's going to be A Body, Some Bears, and a Blade. The story will start at a bear event, a bear conference. We don't have them here in Los Angeles, so we used to, but we don't anymore. So I'm bringing one back in my book, and so it involves the bear community. And for listeners that aren't familiar with the bear community, I'm going to give a really gross stereotype right here. It's large, hairy men that wear plaid and have beards. Okay, that's the gross stereotype. But generally, it is hairy men, usually larger. Different individuals will have their own definition of what a bear is. Some people will say a bear, you have to be a little bit chubby and you have to be hairy, and otherwise you have no right to call yourselves a bear. And other people will say, we allow anyone to come and join us at a bear bar or a bear event. And so you just have to be in bear of mind. But they tend to be fun events. And the reason they exist is people that are bearish not everyone, but many did not feel comfortable being a part of the gay community because they didn't look like all the hot boys dancing at the clubs or at the white parties. And the bear movement started before the internet, but the internet is when it really exploded. And there were bearish men that said, oh, there's other guys like me who are gay, and there's guys that are really into bearish men that maybe other bears are not, who said, wow, there's attractive guys out there that I'm into. And so that's why these conferences exist. And so bears, or those that call themselves bears, will have a place to hang out and feel a little more comfortable than going to a West Hollywood dance club. Now, when I have no problem going to West Hollywood dance club. When I was single, I would enjoy it. I just knew I wasn't likely to be picked up. I wasn't going to be spending the night with someone. And I just enjoyed the dancing. If I wanted to get laid, I'd go to a different bar.
For the listeners here in Alberta, we have a group called FAB, Fellowship of Alberta Bears, a great group that has everything from dances to board game meetups to other food events, etc. It's definitely a group that has picked up speed since it was created in the mid 2000s, in that whatever we call those, the aughts. The bear community here in Alberta is quite large. And I don't mean that just physically, but in population size as well.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of our time with each other, Brad, and we've talked about your books. We've talked about the podcast, a little bit about your career, being bipolar, but there's also something else I discovered in the research. And I think it's fantastic because your titles of the book always say body which of course the crime, but body here is also something with you personally, because I've seen before pictures and I've seen after pictures of you as well. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about the journey when it comes to yourself and physically?
Absolutely. I've been overweight since, well, I think I was a normal fit kid when I was really young. But I started putting on the weight pretty early. And as I got older, I got heavier and heavier. And I was a fat guy. And there were a couple of times I was able to lose quite a bit, but then, like many people, I yo-yoed right back. And when I hit 56 years old, I said, 60 is just around the corner, and I want to live to be 60. So I really need to get rid of this weight. So I made the decision to get gastro bypass surgery, and I've lost over 120 pounds. And I weigh the same weight that I weighed in middle school right now. There was a short period, not a short period, there was a time when if I went to the supermarket across the street, I literally had to stop at least 4 times to catch my breath and hold my side because it hurts. Nowadays, I can put my headset on in the morning and listen to a podcast, and usually several podcasts, and I'll suddenly realize I've gone 6 miles. And I'm totally comfortable. And I'm thinking, it's probably time for me to go home. So if it was I'm not going to say it was the right decision for everybody. There are challenges with it, but I don't regret it and never will regret it. I would do it again.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And congratulations. We don't have the time today, but I picked up on something, when you're saying, well, I'm going to live until I'm 60. And we mentioned a few times earlier about the AIDS crisis with the 80s. And when we are talking to men, or as we're saying, gay men here, there's that reality now that we are missing that generation of men, a couple generations. And for myself, I graduated from high school in 1993. If I became sexually aware at that time and didn't hold off, I may not be here myself. So I'm coming up to 50 in a few years, and I have that same idea that I'm going to live to that age. Whereas beforehand, we were counting months and years or when we would get it. Just say, I'm going to live until 60. When it comes to the gay men and our situations, that brings on a different context and in itself. And those words are layered in a different way as well. But that's going to be a different conversation with us. Hey, Brad, we're wrapping up and we've covered a lot of things. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And I know that's an interview question that you get a job when you go really screwed it up in 2015, 2016, because we can never foresee what happened with COVID. But where do you see yourself 5 years from now when it comes to writing your podcast and life in general?
I will still be writing for sure, without a doubt. That I would probably do for the rest of my life. I don't know how long Mitch will be around, but I would never kill him off. The story's written first person anyway. I wouldn't have him speaking from the grave. There's other series I have in my head. There's a thriller that I have in my head. I will still be writing. I probably will. I'm trying to get myself to the point that I possibly may be able to get a job. It would have to be something flexible where I can work from home. I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but I am talking to individuals about it. So that's a possibility. And I just will continue to love my husband. We have a storybook romance, and wherever I end up, if he's there, then I know I'll be okay. And if he's ever not there, I'll still be okay because of him.
Well, see, here You know, I told you there was going to be no Barbara Walters moments where you were going to cry, but you know, there with the last little bits talking about your storybook relationship, you were trying to make me have a tear. So that's not fair. You're not supposed to do that back at me.
Yeah, if I'm ever on again, we'll have to talk about that story between how he and I met and that sort of thing.
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. Brad Shreve is the writer of the Mitch O'Reilly mystery series. Currently, there are 2 books involved with that. The first one, A Body in a Bathhouse. It was revealed that it was a knife. Where else are you going to hide a weapon? The second book, A Body on the Hill, fairly recent. You can get all of these books here from Amazon, www.amazon.com/Brad. HREVE /E. The rest of it will come up in your search engine. So definitely do go check that out. Brad is the podcast host of Queer Writers of Crime, found at the website with the same title, www.queerwritersofcrime.com. All of this information is individual and can be found on all of our social platforms, YouTube, audio, and our Facebook groups. Everybody, Brad has his own personal website where all of this information can be found. bradshreve.com, BRADSHREVE.com.
Can I say one thing about how to get my books?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. If you want an ebook, it's only available on Amazon, so you can only get it in Kindle. If you'd like a paperback, if you'd like the paperback, it's available on Amazon, and if that's the only way you shop, go for it. But if you really want to help businesses that need to stay around, go to your local bookstore, preferably an independent bookstore. My book is not on the shelf, but any bookstore in the world can order my paperback. Order it and pick it up at an independently run.
For being here today to share your stories. And again, I go back to being introduced to you during the podcast groups that are found on Facebook. You've been so helpful to everyone within the group, and myself picking up on a lot of the information that you've been putting down have helped me greatly as well. So I appreciate. I've read your first book. I'm eagerly waiting for the second book to arrive at me for sure. So thank you so much for coming on today's episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+.
Well, thank you for all your kind words, and thank you for having me on.
And my pleasure. Next week, I have 2 more episodes that are coming to all of you. Next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, I have Vince Spinato. Vince is also found in the Los Angeles region. He has recently released a memoir. There's a documentary coming out about him later this year. And it's about his 25 years in the fragrance community. He's created fragrances for Jennifer Lopez, Victoria Beckham, eyeliner for Gwen Stefani, and his good friends, Lorna Luft and Liza Minnelli, recently announced that he will be the creator of a fragrance celebrating the 100th birthday of Judy Garland. So that will be coming out next year. Vince will be on the podcast as well next Thursday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. We have Kelly Schwab and Carrie Scott, who are documentary creators doing the Trans-Canada project. They're going to be traveling across Canada, interviewing people within the transgender community, and that documentary will be created and released at a later time. So we're going to have both Kelly and Carrie on the episode next Thursday to talk about their personal journey, as well as the documentary they're going across Canada to create. That's next week on Tales of the LGBTQ+, this platform where I'm talking to people and becoming smitten with people one person at a time. Even Brad and his bare self becoming smitten with, for sure. On behalf of Brad, I want to thank all of you for listening to today's episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+, reminding you to be good and always text when you get home. Until next time, everyone.